The day before our wedding, my fiancé's stepsister was going to get married instead of me, so my adoptive mother, to whom I will always be grateful, and owe my life, requested me to call off our wedding. Hello, I'll be discussing about an event that happened between myself, my stepmother, and her biological daughter. Since I was 5 years old, I, 25F, have lived with my stepmother, Mary, 45F. In addition to being an alcoholic, my birth mother was a severe abuser. My dad requested full custody of me as a result of her carelessness in his divorce filing, having grown tired of her actions. Because her problems were not proven in court, my parents had joint custody of me, with my mother caring for me most of the time. But when she left me home alone one day and I unintentionally gained access to the balcony, her foolish behavior soon caught up with her. After noticing, my neighbors reported her to Child Protective Services. I moved in with my father after that. Things weren't easy at first, but they got better once he met Mary. Mary was my father's law clerk. They were acquainted throughout the divorce process and quickly started dating. Jane was my age difference of 2 years. Due to a neurological issue, Jane was confined to a wheelchair on a permanent basis. She had learning problems, therefore the illness also had an impact on her mental health. I was 4 when I first met Mary and Jane. It was a little odd at first because my biological mother had made me fairly reticent around strangers. However, Mary took her time, listened to my predicament, and gradually helped me open up more. In a couple of weeks, I became quite close to both her and Jane. At that point, my dad made the decision to wed her. I seem to recall that their wedding was fairly intimate, with Mary's parents and me as the only guests. Before the wedding, I called her Mary, but ever after, I've called her Mum. After that, things began to improve for us since my dad, a construction worker, created a construction firm, and Mary opened her own practice. His business took off quickly, and after that we never had financial hardship again. Jane and I both had wonderful lives and attended the greatest schools. I always thought of Jane as my sister, lending her support when required and speaking up for her when called upon. Mary had always supported me, to the point that I felt like she was the only mother I had known since I was a toddler. Throughout my life, I have been really appreciative to her since she has kept me alive and well, and I have never ceased to express my gratitude to her. When I entered high school, we relocated to a much nicer neighborhood, which is when I met Ryan, my boyfriend. Ryan was a classmate of mine who lived 2 streets away. After realizing we lived in the same neighborhood, we started attending school together and grew close. He used to come over to my place a lot, and he was friendly with everyone, particularly Jane. She felt most at ease with him than with other people, and it was a great time spent by all of us. He asked me out towards the end of the previous year, and I accepted. Everyone in my family appeared thrilled when I informed them about it, with the exception of Jane. Jane and I didn't communicate much after that day since she would often become annoyed with me. Upon observing Jane's conduct, Mary attributed it to her recent medication adjustment. I recognized this, therefore, in order to keep her calm and prevent arguments, I chose to limit our communication. Ryan and I thus applied to a lot of colleges, and we were fortunate to get accepted into the same university, which was a respectable one. Everyone was ecstatic with our success. And I'm ecstatic, as is Ryan. Since Jane was still a bit aloof from me, I made the decision to have a conversation with her before I went in order to resolve everything since, well, she was family. After we spoke for hours, it became clear to me from her discussion about Ryan that she was infatuated with him. I chose not to bring up the subject at all, even though everything made sense, and I wasn't going to exchange my lover to make things right. Before I left, Jane and I had come to an agreement, and I was happy with that. Before I left, I informed Mary that I felt Jane could have a crush on Ryan, and that it would be wise for her to find out in order to prevent tensions between the two of us from growing. She informed me that I always had her backing and promised to take care of it. The idea of leaving my mum made me upset, and we both started crying a little in the kitchen. A few weeks following our conversation, Ryan and I departed to prepare my college dorm room. Academically, the following 4 years were excellent. I excelled in most areas, gained a lot of knowledge, and was hired for a few internships ahead of my classmates. All in all, I was doing very well. Conversely, my connection with Ryan wasn't the best. We had been having problems on and off for the majority of the time since the start of college. There were even rumors that he had cheated on me as well. As a result, our relationship was barely hanging on towards the end of college. Our past, we both agreed that it would be best to take a short break in order to reunite. I notified my parents about the separation when I returned home to take a few months off after finishing my degree. That didn't appear suspicious, but they weren't as astonished as I had assumed. Jane, who was also going to graduate from high school, asked if I could get Ryan to speak with her, since she needed advice and intended to choose the same major. I offered talking to some of my friends who were in the same major as Ryan because I was a little afraid to call him right away after our split, but she maintained that she only wanted to talk to him. I texted him, choosing to ignore my feelings for Jane in the process. Ryan contacted me after we spoke, telling me that he wasn't interested in Jane in that way, and that Jane was being quite flirty on the conversation. Mary remarked that because Ryan and I had broken up, it shouldn't be a problem for me when I informed her about it. After then, I didn't give it any thought. A few years later, I was working and still living at my parents' house while Jane was about to graduate from college. While out grocery shopping, I happened to run across Ryan, who seemed content with his life and doing well. After we started conversing, we had lunches and brunches together several more times. After a while, we managed to revive our romance, and a few months into it, he proposed to me, to which I naturally said yes. Mary was not at all pleased to hear of our connection, and Jane's contempt was also natural. However, the announcement of my engagement caused chaos in my house. After having a severe tantrum and experiencing an anxiety attack, Jane was rushed to the emergency room. She was okay, but the doctors warned us to be careful with her and not put her under any stress because of her predispositions. Mary and my father spoke about it, and we concluded that it would be better for me to move out. After the incident, I moved out quickly and only used to visit on the weekends. Jane was looking forward to the wedding and had finally come to terms with my engagement. Her original role was maid of honor for me. However, I let her to be a bridesmaid after seeing how she responded to the news of her engagement. Everything was going great, especially with Mary, who was not only covering half of the cost of my wedding but also making an effort to be involved in every little aspect. 2 days prior to my wedding, at my rehearsal dinner address, I expressed my gratitude to her for everything. Everyone was quite inebriated on the evening of my rehearsal dinner when Mary begged to speak with me alone. Assuming it would be a mother-daughter catharsis, I proposed that we have a conversation in my room. I had no idea what was about to happen. Mary then sat me down and started talking about how happy she was to have a child that was similar to me, which made me cry. She started crying and said, "I have similar wishes for Jane, but that's a stretch." She asked me whether I loved her after I comforted her. Yes, I replied. She went on to question whether I owed her my life. Even though it was a ridiculous question, I once again said yes. When she heard this, she got up to beg me to do her a favor. She claimed that I owed her everything, and that's why she wanted me to give my sister Jane a little portion of it when I inquired what it was. Perplexed, I inquired as to what she wished me to disclose. The next thing she said was quite unusual. She said that I had a far better life than Jane had, as she was surrounded by people, one of whom was Ryan. She said that even though she had known from childhood that Jane was attracted to Ryan, she had done nothing about it until our breakup following college. She went on to say that Ryan was ideal for Jane since he was a very understanding man. She requested that I call off our engagement and ask Ryan to wed Jane in her place. I requested her to stop talking as I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but she wouldn't. She claimed that since she had raised me as if I were her own kid and embraced me as her own blood, this was the only way I could make up for it. She expressed her hope that Jane will find a partner in the future and mentioned that Ryan was the one person she was certain wouldn't break her daughter's heart. She wanted me to persuade Ryan since she knew he wasn't interested in Jane in that way. I was unable to comprehend the situation and became furious, forcing her to leave my room as she yelled at me to think about it, and that if I did this one thing for her kid, I would be forever grateful to her. My dad arrived and inquired about the reason behind her outburst. I just shut him and Mary out without responding. I sobbed in my room and was unaware that I had slept off. When I awoke late the next morning, my father requested me to come see him in his room. Mary was there, her eyes puffy from sobbing. He told me that what I did the previous evening was inappropriate and that I shouldn't have treated Mary, my mother, that way or kicked her out. That's when I realized he had no idea what Mary had requested of me. Mary signaled to me not to tell him the truth as I was going to tell him. Mary gripped my hand strongly. I dismissed her hand with a shrug, and before I could respond, there was a scream coming from Jane's chamber. She suffered wounds on her legs after falling in the loo. My dad decided to take her to the emergency room right away because we didn't have adequate first aid supplies, and to talk to me and Mary about the situation afterwards. Ever since, Mary has begged me not to tell my dad the truth because it would ruin their relationship. I've been sitting in my room because I don't want to talk to her. What would happen, AITA, if I didn't give Mary another opportunity to apologize or clarify herself before telling my dad what she had demanded of me? Update 1. Hello everyone, I appreciate all of your warm words. At first I did see that Mary was to blame, but as my father attempted to step in, I began to question my own judgment. In addition, I've made the decision to follow the commenter's suggestion and notify Ryan ahead of my father. In addition, some have questioned how, knowing that Jane had a crush on Ryan, I was unaware of her intentions at the time. The problem is that everyone assumed it was just a harmless crush, and nothing more, including Ryan. Ryan had never, ever shown Jane any appreciation for her sentiments, either with words or deeds. However, I believe that I should have been more cautious when using the cues because, in addition to getting Jane a wedding dress during my dress shopping, Mary also decided to get Jane a wedding dress in order to fulfill her wish to see both of her daughters in wedding dresses. Jane may have had difficulty finding a husband because of her condition and unjustified prejudices. Jane, on the other hand, was all right with some well-tended wounds on her legs. She was unaware of what Mary had requested from me, and to be honest, I wasn't sure how she would respond if she found out. Nevertheless, Mary was standing in the corner, her face growing pale, when I went to meet Jane after she had returned. Mary passed asleep right away when I contacted my dad to beg for the vehicle keys so I could visit Ryan, because she was afraid I would tell on her. Dad chose to remain next to her as I assisted her into bed, thereby blaming me for her state. I took the vehicle keys and went right away, before I had a chance to explain anything. Since I'm writing this after meeting Ryan, I went to ask him to meet me in my car, so that I wouldn't draw unwelcome attention. He rushed down, sensing from my voice that it was serious. I filled him in on everything that had occurred the previous evening, and suggested that perhaps Jane's little crush wasn't so small after all. He had always appreciated Mary for being an amazing lady and a loving mother to me, so he was more astonished than I was. He suggested delaying the wedding for a few weeks, because such a significant discovery would need a lot of unpacking. He was quite explicit in saying that he would always have my back, even if it meant eloping in order to be with me. I requested him not go, as it was a family concern first, even though he wanted to be present while I told my dad about this. After I finished telling, he agreed and requested me to call him right away. In the meanwhile, he would inform his guests that the wedding would be postponed because of some personal difficulties. Despite my happiness at having someone like Ryan in my life, I remained afraid that our connection, which my dad had always been the foundation of, would suffer as a result of this whole situation. I was not ready to lose my dad on top of the mother I had lost yesterday. Update 2 following the last update, a lot happened. With all the bravery I could muster, I returned to tell my father what had happened. Mary let me in by opening the door. She appeared less anxious than she had earlier. When I walked into the room, Jane was lying down and my dad was seated on the bed. He motioned for me to take a seat, looking irate. He told me he was really disappointed in me, and that he knew what had happened the previous night. When I asked him what he was talking about, he said that Mary had told him how I had chastised her the previous evening, accusing her of not being my biological mother and Jane of not being related to me, and that's why I didn't want them to attend the wedding. My father claims that I told Mary, when she attempted to reassure me, that I didn't want her crippled kid to ruin our wedding photos. Mary's ingenuity was beyond my comprehension. My dad was understandably astonished when I tried to tell him the truth about her, but he said that it was a case of my statements being contradicted by Mary's, and that he could not possibly accept either version of events as true, so perhaps we should settle it for the time being. Jane insisted on telling me how her mother was telling the truth all the time, and I was now positive Mary had told her daughter the truth and only wanted her to go along with it. I made it very apparent to my dad that the wedding had been rescheduled. I could not care who he believed to be speaking the truth, but I could not tolerate being in the company of someone who had attempted to emotionally blackmail me into losing the love of my life. Mary instantly stepped in, saying that she longed for our relationship to gain a second opportunity by attending my wedding and that she wanted to apologize if she had done anything wrong while raising me. A lot of money had been spent, so my dad was also urging that I move on and allow the wedding go smoothly, but I chose to ignore their advice and moved out that same day. It's been 2 days since I departed to stay at Ryan's place. I disabled my social media account since I didn't really have the energy to handle anything. My dad and Mary haven't gotten in touch with me yet, but I've been receiving calls from certain relatives, which I haven't returned, presuming they had to do with the wedding's cancellation. Right now, things are somewhat hectic, so perhaps I can figure something out soon. Update 3: I left my parents' place a week after the previous update, which was about the wedding being postponed. After a week of the incessant calls, I received a message on Facebook from Ryan, my dad's buddy, saying that he had posted something on my wall. It seems that our relatives decided to bother my dad and get married over the cancellation of our wedding after they were unable to find out why it had happened for me. He created the post after they were unable to get in touch with me, despite their attempts to reach out to me in order to at least make a family announcement. He wrote in that post about how he, Mary, and Jane were pleading with me to react to them and not damage their image over trivial family matters, as dialogue was the only way to resolve this. The already problematic relationship with our relatives was further exacerbated by this post, and all of his Facebook friends began to speculate and circulate rumors about it. The most shocking thing I was told was that I had cheated on Ryan after stealing money for the wedding. Ryan was starting to feel anxious about everything, so I spoke with him. I was afraid he might change his mind, but to my amazement, he reassured me once again that he would marry me no matter what happened. A day after the post, I was planning to talk to my parents to at least be sane before the big confrontation, but things took a different turn. I still hadn't reacted to the post. My biological mom's mother, my grandma, called me that same evening. She wasn't related to the incident, so I hadn't brought her up before, but she's played a significant role in my life. She has always looked out for me, kept me safe from my mother, and even provided financial support for my dad. She wasn't generally involved in our affairs, but the fact that she stepped in during this episode indicated that something significant had occurred. It seems that she learnt about everything and questioned my father directly about it. He gave her Mary's version, the one he thought to be true. Grandma chose to speak with me about it next because she trusted me and sensed something wasn't quite right. She assured me that I would never have thought of Mary and Jane as not being part of my family because of how much I loved them. The thought of someone in my family perhaps accepting my side at last made me cry, and I told my granny everything. She remarked that she was astounded by Mary's vileness and that her inebriation had spared me from her evil intents. When I informed her that I was afraid of losing my dad, she suggested that I first speak with my parents while she looked for a way to help. I made the decision to see my folks again the next day. I was repeatedly held accountable for turning our family into a public spectacle. After only a few minutes, I was genuinely done with them and wanted to speak with Mary alone for a little while. We went to the other room, and I asked her why, after all my life, I had loved her, she was treating me like this. She said that what she had said was a reflection of how she was feeling, and that she never intended to burden me with it. She begged me to move on from it all and consider it all a mistake. She threatened to reprimand me after I told her that her out-of-control behavior and unreasonable demands weren't acceptable, and that I would always stick to the truth. After hearing this, I walked outside and questioned my father, once again, whether he would even believe what I had told him Mary had demanded of me. He told me that what I was accusing Mary of was really serious, and that he could not have believed such a thing about the lady he had spent so much time loving. He was shocked by his own blood, but I had my revenge and I bounded from their home. The next thing I learned is that they stopped communicating with me because they were telling others that I had abandoned them. I had a feeling my granny was up to no good. Thus, this coming weekend, Ryan and I are going to see her at her country house. Update 4, I'll begin by sharing some encouraging news. After Ryan and I arrived to my grandma's lovely home, she advised us to think about eloping and getting married in her backyard instead, because my parents had caused such a fuss. Ryan contacted his parents to seek for approval after thinking it would be a nice idea. They were overjoyed that we were being married, so my grandmother summoned the local priest the following day, and Ryan and I were wed. Using his Facebook page, he informed everyone of the news. Although there were a few comments on the post, we chose to look them up after we got home. After seeing the article and understanding the history, my dad and Mary started phoning and texting my grandma. My grandmother informed my parents that they were the ones who had started slandering me in response to their pathetic behavior. Thus, they shouldn't be shocked by this at this point, and the discussion came to a close. Following the incident at my parents' place, I told my grandma what had transpired and inquired as to whether she had any plans to take action. When she asked what I wanted, I told her straight out that I wanted to expose Mary in front of my dad for her alleged threat, supposing that Jane was already aware of what her mother was up to. Then my granny told me about the scheme. She claimed to have had a sizable amount of money set aside for alimony from her previous marriage, and she would tell people that she would give it all to me so that I could start over after my parents had abandoned me. She was certain that my dad and Mary would want a piece of the money, and if Mary confessed, she would pretend to give it to them. She claimed to have proof of this as I had contacted her by mistake that evening. I decided to give it a try because I had nothing to lose and was married to the guy I loved and had a family with my grandmother. My grandmother informed my dad over the phone the next day that they had severed their ties with me and that I would be receiving her money. My dad, Mary, and Jane showed up at my grandma's house the following evening because, as she had anticipated, they were surprised and wanted to speak with her in person. They gave Ryan and me congrats. But after that, not much occurred. My grandmother had made the decision to speak with them the following day. After dinner, Mary requested if we could have a private conversation. She started talking about how, after all this trouble and with all this new money, I was finally getting married and my life was at peace. I didn't want to bother her too much, so I asked her why she was having the private talk. Whatever it was that she had done that evening, she claimed, it was completely wrong. I wanted her to feel bad about herself for ruining my relationship with my father and maybe Jane, so I asked her to explain what she had done. She expressed her sincere regret for urging me to leave Ryan and persuade him to wed Jane in her place. She went on to clarify that it was all just her maternal instinct, and that's another reason we're having this conversation. I anticipated her to say something to the effect that I was also her daughter, that she was sorry, and that she wanted to make things right by being honest. Conversely, she informed me that Jane could settle down and have a brighter future with the amount of money I had at this time. I didn't stop her and let her carry on. Even though Jane's life was already difficult, she persisted in attempting to persuade me to give her half of the money I had, and this was the least I could do for her now that the love of her life was my wife. I ignored her and started examining the kitchen door from behind. My dad had come looking for us midway during the chat, and for some reason I don't know how he chose to remain silent and pay attention to what Mary was saying. This must have been God's will. She was too busy defending herself to me to notice that he was immediately behind her. She saw what a mistake she had made when she realized my dad had been there the entire time when I looked at him after she was finished. Instead of trying to hide anything that was stated during the conversation, Mary divulged a great deal more about how she had been aware of it all along and was acting on Jane's behalf. My father phoned Jane right away to find out whether she was aware of this. Given the tense circumstances, she decided it would be best for her to be honest. Mary and Jane were advised to leave the house as soon as possible the following morning since my dad had a lot on his mind. He then turned to face me and started to apologize for not believing me in the first place. Mary attempted to beg, mentioning Jane's illness, but Dad seemed uninterested in listening. This was a lot to process, so I requested my dad to retire to his room and recuperate. While Mary and Jane made the decision to remain in another room, at least until they departed, Ryan escorted Dad. Nobody sympathized with them, and it was evident that Mary had anticipated it. That evening, as I considered how horrible things had gotten, and how, only a few months prior, our family had been joyful, I started crying. In an attempt to comfort me, Ryan declared that he would be my true family moving forward. Mary and Jane departed the next day, and my dad left 2 days later, having profusely apologized to me for never having trusted me in the first place. I informed him that we should go cautiously moving forward since his mistrust of me may have harmed our relationship. Despite his sad appearance, he consented to give me some space. Thanking my granny for everything she had done for me, Ryan and I also departed that same day. I invited her to spend some time with me, and she may come back in the summer. Update 4 months after my dad and Mary's incident. I'm posting this update in response to several of your inquiries. Thus, even after divorcing Mary, my dad expressed his desire to remain in Jane's life should she so choose, a desire that Mary refused to accept. Mary had made several attempts to win him back, but to no avail. She never expressed regret for everything she had caused me to go through. She rationalized that since all she had done had been for her child, it was okay. All I was thinking was how nice it would be to be rid of her.